Hey everyone, how's it going? Thank you for being here with us for part 3 of this Hands On with Maxon series. And I'm joined with fellow UK trainer Matt. How's it going, Matt?
It's going okay. It's very hot here, so we're enjoying sunshine and weather in the UK for the first time in years.
Yes, we are loving it. However, it does rain tomorrow in standard UK fashion. We get a good day and then 5 bad days.
That's it.
Great.
That's it. This is summer. We now have autumn for the next 4 months.
Yeah. Cool. So, right. So, what are we doing today? I can't. First of all, I can't believe we're now on week 3 already. How quick is it going? It's mad.
I know. I
So,
hope everybody's been keeping up with it, and of course, if they haven't, then they have access to all of the videos and stuff on YouTube. That the links are available in our chat, or will
yes,
be.
they are now all in there. If not, I'll ping them in there so everyone's got access to those. So, if you are joining us for the first time, first of all, thanks for being here. Hi. Um,
Hello.
the idea of this kind of workshop is for you guys to get comfortable in Cinema 4D in just 6 weeks. So we'll keep this introduction short because we have so much stuff that we want to show you today. We just kind of, we can just get carried away. So really quickly about the course. So, we split it into 6 weeks. We've done weeks 1 and 2. So we've done getting started where we looked at primitives, deformers, the actual Cinema 4D layout. We then did modeling last week. I went through a whole bunch of like different types of modeling. We looked at subdivision surface. We then kind of built some stuff with generators and splines and stuff like that. It was like a whole bunch of stuff. And as Matt said, we've got an unlisted playlist on YouTube with all of those recordings on, and kind of each week we'll be uploading the next one. So yeah, we'll link that in the chat if it's not in there already. And today, lighting and materials. And so on the next slide, we'll go through the stuff that we're going to be going through. But then next week we're looking at animation and dynamics. So we're getting really into like some really cool stuff in cinema. And then week 5 is MoGraph, and I'm going to round it up with week 6 rendering. Cool. So yeah, today, what are we doing today? So the idea is we're going to learn the different types of lights inside of Cinema 4D. So you've got area, we've got spot, infinite, we've got target, we've got sun, we've got loads of different light types. So we're going to have a look at all of those. We're also going to look at how to set up 3-point lighting and kind of what that exactly is. We're then going to look at HDRIs, kind of what they are and when and why we use them and how they can, make some really nice lighting in our scene and look really good, to be honest. We're also going to learn what global illumination is and how this helps with our lighting. So we're going to this will be in our render settings, so we'll be having a look at that. But don't worry, we're not going too much into rendering because we're saving that for the last week. We're also going to look at standard and physical workflows. So you might hear people talk about like PBR and what exactly PBR means. So we're going to run through that just so you guys are all kind of like up to speed with that. We're then going to create some materials from scratch. So, some ceramics, some plastic, metal, wood, in a whole different variety of methods. So some using like textures, some using noises, and some just using kind of the channels inside the material manager. And we're going to use these on our shelf scene, which is in our project files. So we'll link that as well so you guys can follow along. And we're also going to add some lighting to that scene as well, just to make it look like really nice. So I guess we can kind of like get into it and get started. And hi to everyone who is saying hey to Lipa, Ryan, Derek, thanks for being here, Yaz, Drake, Keenan. It's nice to see you all today. Thank you for being here live, and to anyone who's watching the recording, thank you so much as well.
Yep.
Hi.
Okay, so do you want to, as we've started to say, do you want to throw the screen at me?
I will throw it at you.
Yeah, I will duck. And it does appear that we will need our links for the files and the recordings to be pasted into the chat. So what Elly will be looking at a bit later is adding materials to our scene that was built last week. So if you didn't finish it or didn't do it at all or missed that, then you'll be able to download the files shortly from the link that we will put in the chat section. Again, if you have any questions, if you need to ask any thing about what we're about to do please just jump in the questions, and Elly will be monitoring that and interrupt me so that we can crack on with doing what we need to do. So show my screen. Can you see my screen? Yes. You don't need that. You need Cinema 4D. Hooray! Okay, so let's have a look at lighting then, funnily enough, because that's what we're going to do. Lighting exists largely under the big light bulb button over here. And you can see we have a variety of different light types that we can create. We won't look at every single one of them. I may describe to a few of them, but just quickly, let's go through. So we have our light. This is an Umney light. When it refreshes, hello. Oh, don't know what that was. An Umney light is an omnidirectional light, meaning that it shines light 360 degrees all the way around. If I click render, which is this button up here, you'll see you can't see anything because it is a light lighting up nothing because there's nothing to light up. So let's just create a floor very quickly using this floor button, which is just to left of the light. And then I'm going to move my light up and you see, hurrah, I have some illumination. The omnidirectional light is exactly that. It goes omnidirectionally all the way around and creates 360 degrees of light. So that's really quite simple, but it's not a visible light, so we can't see it. It just creates effects of lights down there. Light settings are all very similar, so I'll only go through this sort of once, and you'll see that it's very similar for all the different lights. We have a Generals tab, which allows you to change the color of your light. It is relatively easy to do. You can just choose that. We have the ability of changing the different types of lights as well. If you haven't created the specific one that you need, you can swap between them. We can turn on and off shadows, which we'll look at in a bit. And we've also got visible light, which hopefully if we have some time, we may be able to look at visible and volumetric lighting. Okay, but the general shape of the light, which is all we're looking at for the moment, is this omnidirectional light. I'm just going to delete that. If I look at another different type of light, let's try a spotlight. You will see, funnily enough, that it looks like a spotlight. It is a light that only points on a specific spot. This spot can be increased in size and decreased in size, and obviously depending on the distance from the object, from the light source onto the object that it is receiving the light, will make a difference to the size as well. That bit doesn't make much of a difference other than focus length, but that doesn't really matter at this point. So again, you can change the color of these, you can angle them around, you can move them just like any other light, any other object that you would expect to find. Okay. The next one is a target light. And this target light, funnily enough, is actually a spotlight, but it creates two extra things for you. One of them is a light target, and the other one is a target tag that exists on your light. Now, if I move my light target, you will see that the light stays where it is, but it is always pointing to the light target. If I select my light and move it, it will always continue to point to wherever the target is. So it's a very nice way of controlling just a simple, movement of light of a point if you don't want to worry about rotating this. If you've got a specific object that you want it to follow, you can either make the light target a child of that object, or you can simply point your light target object to the right. You change your light, what is it with me today? The target tag on your light, you can simply put in the object that you want it to follow. So that's quite a neat trick to enable things to point, certainly lights and stuff. Okay, moving on. We have an area light, which funnily enough is light coming from an area. Now by default, this light is not physically accurate, so it doesn't matter how big this light is or how far away from something, it doesn't emit any more or less light. You can turn that on by going to details, and where it says fall off, you can do inverse square, and you can even see that it says physically accurate on it, which means that it will now be more physically accurate, the amount of light that it would create based on its size, and its position towards various objects. You can see you get a much more diffuse light if it's further away, or a much sharper light if it is closer. But as you see, I need to render my scene in order to see the proper effects of what is happening with this light, and that's just this button up here for anybody that doesn't remember, which is either shortcut Command R on a Mac or Control R on a PC. So that's that one. We also have some other types of lights. Now, an IES light I will just describe. When manufacturers of light fittings create their light fittings, they also create a digital 3D map of a light dispersal place that is used in engineering. So this is an IES profile. If you put an IES profile in an IES light, then you would get exactly the correct light dispersal pattern that you would expect to find if you were to use that manufactured light fitting on the wall. So it's very good for architectural visualization and ensuring that you can choose the correct light dispersal pattern for the fittings that will be used in the final building. You then have an infinite light, and an infinite light is a bit like the sky. So it is a light that emits like a big infinite directional way. So it's quite useful for trying to replicate an all-encompassing light source. You also have, funnily enough, a sunlight, which is very good at replicating light from a sun. The sun light is designed to work under the sun tab. You can choose times, you can choose dates, you can choose longitude and latitude. So if you have particular places that it needs to be, then you can try to accurately represent the light and the sunlight and the shadows that you would expect to find from that geographical location. We also have a PBR light, which is for our physically based rendering, which we will come to. And we have a lighting tool. Now the lighting tool is, I will demonstrate incredibly quickly. So if I create an object and I create myself another spotlight, boom, I can put my light here. If I wanted the light to be the other side, I would have to move this up and then spend time pointing at it. Or there's another trick where you can make light a camera and you can see where you're looking through it. But the other one, which is quite nice, is the lighting tool. So if I select the lighting tool, then I select the light, you can see I've got this little surface pattern here. And what I can do, I can click with my left mouse button and hold and move my mouse, and I can control where I want my light to point to. So it's quite a neat little trick, because other than that, trying to move the light exactly round where you want it on a surface like this can be a bit finicky. So this is quite a nice little tool in order to help you do that. Okay. Right. Are there any questions on lights so far?
Yes, just quickly. Is there any difference between the target light, which I think is the spotlight, and just adding a target tag to a spotlight? So is the light the same?
The light is still a spotlight. There's no actual difference to the light itself. It just comes pre-made with 2 extra things.
And Jonathan wished he had the lighting tool in a photo studio.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those tools that people in Cinema 4D, it used to be a lot more hidden. So the fact that it's there now makes it a lot more obvious for people to use. But I've shown people that and they've just looked at me and gone, "You're kidding me, that was there?" I was like, yeah, it's really helpful, isn't it?
Also, a quick one. Is there another command if you don't have a left click on your mouse to move the light in that way?
Don't have a left click. I don't think so, because it's just left click, isn't it? Well, I would enable more buttons on your mouse, but there's not that I'm aware of, because it requires the mouse interaction.
Yeah. Yeah, let's have a quick look. Ryan's asked, can you explain the concept of tags? There are a lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose tags are an additional programming language of such. They're kind of like a little function that you can add to objects, and they do all sorts of things. Like later when we look at materials, you will find that there will be a materials tag generated, and that tag is something that links that object with a material. That's what the material tag does. You can see under my tags that we've got a whole host of different types of tags, and they of course do different things. Under, which I'm now trying to remember where it is, under animation tags, you have the target tag, as well as align to splines and paths and things like that, some of which we will look through. We have metaball tags for when we're doing metaball stuff, redshift tags for when we want things to become redshift items, rigging, rendering. They all have their own specific function, and they all do different things. You don't necessarily need them until you know you need them, but they allow you to kind of enhance the functionality of the object that you put them on based on the type of tag that's been created. Hope that sort of explains it.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I think that's everything for now. Josie was asking to show something again, but I'm not sure what she's referring to, so I've just asked, so I might have another question for you in a sec.
Okay, I will, let's have a look at 3-point lighting. So what is 3-point lighting? 3-point lighting, funnily enough, is the lighting setup using 3 lights. It's kind of a standard photographic principle to properly light objects without having them disappear off into the distance, disappear into their own shadows, not be able to see the details behind. So that's the general principle, and funnily enough, we use 3 lights to do it, and it's a very quick and easy setup, so I'm going to do that super fast. So I'm going to create, I don't know why I'm about to delete that, I'm going to create an incredible 3D scene here, and you will learn again just why I am a 3D modeler by trade and not a graphic designer. And there we go, there it is, there is my scene. So it's an incredible scene, isn't it? It's absolutely phenomenal. My 3D modeling knows no bounds. So let's have a look at 3-point lighting system. So you can see the problem that we've got is that it's very flat. Now, even if I create a light, it's going to look very flat. So let's create a light. Now, this is another thing to remember. When creating a light, it creates a light at world 0. If you have an object at world 0, it will create your light inside that object. Therefore, your scene will go black. I have had tech support things where this occurs, so I just remind them to don't forget to move the light up, and you will see that you can light your scene and it illuminates. So let's just render this and have a look. It looks very, very flat. And the reason for that is because it is missing something incredibly obvious, and that is the fact that by default, shadows are not on. So on our light, which is an Umney light, and that's all I'm going to use for this. You can use a spotlight if you want to, but I'm just going to use the omnidirectional ones. We have a shadow drop down here, and there are 3 different settings. You have shadow maps, soft, and if I render now, you can see that I have a fuzzy, soft outline around all of my objects, no matter where the placement of that is. Fine. If I change that to ray traced, or in brackets hard, then it will have a hard, and in this case aliased, line all the way around and be very jaggedy, but it'd be a very harsh line. If I change that to area, I get a green screen. You can see I now have a mix of the 2. This is the physically accurate version in that it works on the principle that the closer an object is that is casting the shadow to the object receiving the shadow, the sharper the shadow will be, and then it fades out towards the end the further away it gets. So that's the principle of that. But you can see quite quickly that that looked more realistic just simply by adding a shadow. I'm not saying this is going to win any awards for photorealism, but nonetheless, it does look a lot better than it did before, and it feels a lot more seated on the ground than it previously was. So this 3-point lighting system, funnily enough, requires a few more lights. The first light is your main light. This is the one that you control. This is your main focus of where you want to feel that your objects are being illuminated from. And what I'm going to do, because I've already got shadows and everything set up on this one, I'm just going to copy and paste it. So Control C, Control V, and now I have two. They're in exactly the same spot. I'm then going to drag that one the other side. And what this does is this illuminates the opposite side. So if I just turn that off really quickly with the green tick and quick render, you can see the problem we've got is that my objects are disappearing into their own shadows. We can't see the difference between where the shadow was and your end of your object. And that's no use if you're doing product shots or product lighting, because you're not going to see the wonderful product that you spent all this time modeling. So let's create our second light. And we render that, and you can see now my sphere feels a lot more realistic. There is a lot more information coming from it. This light is normally not as bright because we don't want it to take away the impetus of the first one. So I'm going to lower that down to about 50%. Now I always get my names mixed up. This is a fill light, isn't it? Elly, you're going to remind me on that one.
Which one's this? The main one?
The main is main one. The second one is fill.
Yeah, secondary is fill, and then rim.
It's FX, isn't it? The third one.
Oh, I do rim.
You do what?
Rim light, because it catches
the
edges. But I'm sure that there are multiple names.
Different names. I mean, you can call them 1, 2, and 3 if you really want to. But yeah, the main light is the one that you're focusing on. The fill light is the one which is doing that, which is filling the behind. And for some reason, there is a tendency to make this ever so slightly blue, but that's entirely down to you guys. And then the third light, which I shall copy and paste again, and I will bring to basically the side of my object, and I will lower that down quite a bit. And this, well, if it's Elly, so I've heard that called effects or.
So we've got a couple of the guys are saying key fill rim, but TJ who's saying film backlight.
Oh.
So there are obviously
different names, different schools. This is one of the reasons why people go to university to learn photography and lighting, because this is the sort of information that you do. It's amazing the different disciplines you need to be to do 3D animation. So this, again, sometimes has a slight tendency to be a slightly beige color and not quite so powerful, because we don't want it to take away from the other two. But what we do want to do is use it to stop any detail below or around the sides disappearing. And even though I don't need to worry the direction that these are facing, because they're Umney lights, they're going to create light in 360 degrees anyway, so it's not that much of a problem. But what I might do is use my top view, which can be accessed from F2 on your keyboard, or middle mouse click, or top right hand corner of your viewport, press, and then the top view and press again. And just to make sure that this is round the side, and you can reposition. And it really does depend on where your camera is as well, as to where these are going to have the most effect that you need them to be. So let's just do that, and let's bring that FX light down. And then I render, and you can see that I've got not too bad a scene, and it feels a lot more realistic than they did before because of the different types of lights that we have around. But we're no longer losing the detail on the sphere and the edge of my cone. I'm losing a bit of darkness there, but you can always reposition lights and objects if you need to. Another really good thing in 3D, which real photographers are generally jealous of, is that what I can do, I can take my other two lights and I can turn the shadows off. Which means that I can control the amount of shadow that I'm getting on my object. It might look a little bit crazy or strange, depending on where my lights are and what I am trying to cast shadows on or not cast shadows on. But what some people spend hours photoshopping out, we can just turn off. So that's a really another useful thing. You don't necessarily have to have shadows on your objects all the time in order to use the lights. So that's a quick understanding, a quick view through 3-point lighting. Okay, any questions on that one?
Yes, we've got a couple. So Ryan was asking, why are you adjusting the V and not the intensity?
Good question. Honestly, just because I suppose it's old school. When I goes to show how long I've been using cinema. When I started using cinema, there wasn't an intensity bar, so I just used to use the V color shade to change it because that's all you could do. But effectively, I don't think it makes much of a difference, does it?
I'm not sure, because I know the intensity is not only like the intensity of the light, but also the intensity of like the reflection and the reflectance as well. So it kind of
Yeah,
mixed
in
together.
theory that would do the same thing, because if your light is a dimmer color, it would be less. But yeah, you can also whack up. Can you whack up the intensity more than that than you can with the V? So you have a little bit of extra usability with that one. Maybe I need to adjust my old habits.
Different people work
Anything
different
else?
ways. Yeah, so Jonathan was asking, when using the single light on the sphere, how do you get reflected light from the floor onto the lower section of the sphere?
Ah, we will get to that shortly, because that's not what I'm about. That is not the next thing I'm about to cover, but the thing after that. So we will come back to that one.
Cool. Andrew was asking, where would you put the cam in that setup? So where would you put where would you have the camera?
That it's actually the wrong way round. You put the camera where you want it, and then you position the lights where you need them to look good for the camera. So I have done it based on where my camera is now, looking this way, and
So
I
where
can
the
see,
default camera is naturally where you'd probably have it, because yeah, you have the key light off to the other side, like the opposite angle of the camera, and then your fill tends to be the camera side to, like Matt says, fill in those darker areas, and the rim is like off at a
yeah. So
back
I
of it.
will look at where is not illuminating properly, and I will adjust my lights for where I want my camera to be. So if I had to move my camera and I found that bits were disappearing, I would have to adjust my lights. As every poor photographer in a studio knows, as soon as you turn something around, that's the entire system you've got to slowly shunt around.
Also, really quickly, back to the lighting tool. Could
Yep.
you just quickly show how you like got that activated, and then
Okay,
were
sure.
moving the little target thing around? And then could you also show how you'd like sort of deactivate or get off of that tool so you can then change the settings in the light, just for
Sure thing.
some chills?
So let's create a sphere. This is my object that I will have as a light, as a source, and then let's create a spotlight, and I move my spotlight over here. So it's further out the way. So that's the sort of light that I want. All you need to do, the lighting tool is a tool like any other. So it's like going to move, scale, or rotate. All you do is go to the lighting tool and then hover over the object that you wish it to project onto, or to orbit around, I suppose is the true term. And then click and hold with my left mouse button and then move. And then you just need to change the tool. So I would probably go to the move tool up there. And then that would enable me to go to my lights and change anything. Although you can still do that if you are under the lighting tool. You just click on the light and then change its settings.
Cool, thanks.
That's all right.
That's everything for now, I think.
Okay, right. Let's have a look now then at HDRIs. So an HDRI is a high dynamic range image. This means that it is an image that has more, or a high dynamic range, of brightness data embedded into it. So it's more than just an image of necessarily the sun. You know, that would not necessarily have an awful lot of brightness data. It would just be a picture of the sun. But what you can do, an HDRI is created via taking the same picture multiple times at different levels of exposure and then compositing them together and then the computer can work out where more brightness data comes from. So if you had a picture, and I'll tell you what, let's do this. Let's create an object that we will put an HDRI onto, which fun enough will be a sky object. So up here under the floor object, if you click and hold, you see we've got a few different things. Do not make the physical sky, that's something completely different. We just want the sky. The sky is actually an infinitely large sphere that you will never get to no matter how far you move out. So it is a giant sphere that wraps entirely around your scene. Now, let's have a look at our asset browser. I was about to say content browser then, and let's do a search for an HDR. Now, the reason why I didn't search for HDRI is because I want to show you what the HDR is. These HD materials are pre-made materials that I can click and drag and drop onto the sky. That's what we will use in a minute. Underneath those are these images. So if I just download this asset and have a look in the picture viewer, I can't technically use this right now, but you can see we have an awful lot of brightness data coming from the television, the lamps, the sides, which means if we were to use this in a scene, we would be able to turn on a setting, which I'm ever increasing towards, that would use the brightness data from this image. So the dark bits would be dark, the light bits would be light, and we can control the intensity of that light creation on this scene. So this is Alexi's apartment. I'm not sure if I got an Alexi's apartment one. Let's just create one of the room ones. So let's go for room number 2. Double click, that downloads my asset and it puts it in my scene. So the ones in the round balls are the pre-made ones. So to use a material, I'm going to click and drag and drop. Because I've got nothing else in my scene, it will go to the sky. Perfect. And now if I look around my scene, you can see I've got an incredibly pixelated version, but this is just doing its best to kind of remain fast. So there's no problem there. I think I can turn that so I can see the image a bit better. So load up my material, go to viewport, texture shading, no scale, and you can see my image clarifies a bit. So that's load up your material. That's the viewport section of the material. We will go through all of these in a bit, and change texture preview to no scaling. And now I have a much clearer picture. You can see that it is using that works all the way around. And if I was to create a sphere, and I'm going to use this to HDRI to light my object, if I render this now, you will see that it makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. My sphere still looks as boring and grey as if the sky wasn't there. So turn it off from lighting, turn it off from rendering, and you'd be absolutely right. This is because we need to turn on a setting in our render settings that forces Cinema 4D to recognize the information coming from the HDRI systems as a light source. So if I go up to my render settings up there, and I go to my effect button halfway on the left, I'm going to choose a setting called Global Illumination. Now that forces Cinema 4D to understand that light actually bounces. Going back to that question earlier about how to make light reflecting from the floor bounce up, this is what you will do, and we will use that as an example shortly. So if I turn on Global Illumination, you can't see anything off the cuff. Nothing will have changed. If I render, you can see I'm now getting more information, and it did a quick pass those strange grey dots as Cinema 4D tried to work out how light was bouncing around this scene and where would be illuminated and where wouldn't. So let's just render again. You can see I've got light coming from one side and light coming from another. Let's try a different HDRI. So let's try this Photo Studio one with harsh shadows, and I'm just going to drag and drop it over the top of the one that I've already put on my object up here to replace it. And now you can see I've got 2 white lines, and they will produce illumination either side. So you can see that I'm getting a nice soft illumination all the way around, but I'm getting the dark area where there is nothing coming in from the other side. So it's actually using this to make it feel like it is in this scene, which is a great way of illuminating your scenes and products. You also need HDRIs for any form of product shot that has any form of reflective material, because reflective materials need a scene or environment to reflect around as well as to be illuminated. And you'll often find that sometimes people use scenes on HDRIs that aren't actually correct. So I've seen people use a car in a studio and everyone says that looks really good, but when you look closely at the reflections in the car, you'll see it's covered in trees, because they're using an HDR of an outside because it gives nicer reflections. And it's a nice little cheat that you can use in 3D. So an HDR, as you can see, is a 360-degree image that also has brightness data in it, so that you can look and you can adjust the intensity of those lights, and the light part will emit light, the darker parts won't. That's a really useful thing that we have in Cinema 4D. But let's also have a look. I'm just going to turn off my sky now, and let's have a look at the sphere. And I'm going to create my floor again, and I'm going to create my light. So let's create my spotlight. One of the questions we got was, how do we get lights to bounce information inside Cinema 4D? So when I create my sphere and I create my light, I'm going all over the shop here today. Oops. If I turn off global illumination and render, the side of this is dark. You know, there is no information on the back side of this sphere, which technically wouldn't be true, because as we all know, light bounces, otherwise we wouldn't be able to see. There should be some light bouncing back off of this floor onto this sphere. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom into this so it's a nice big screen, and then I'm going to render to my picture viewer, which is this second button, so that it goes up here so that I can flip between the two images I'm about to create. Let's dock that so that we can use it in a second. So click and drag over there to change my, so I now can go to my view, or I can go to my picture viewer. Now I'm going to turn global illumination on, and I'm going to render to my picture viewer again. Oh, hello. And you can see it thinks about it. It takes a little bit longer. And whilst there's not a great deal of information coming from that, you should be able to see that light is bouncing back onto the sphere from the floor, and equally light is bouncing back onto the floor from the sphere. At the moment, I don't have any materials on this at all, so it's quite amazing that it's doing any form of reflection whatsoever. But that's just the default materials that things are created on. If you had a proper reflective material, light will bounce, and it will bounce properly. So that's another one of the joys of global illumination. A further joy, which I shall just go into incredibly fast, is that you can actually light a scene without the need for a light. So if I create some form of plane, and I'm just going to rotate it that way and move it this way, I will get to more materials in a second. But if I create a new material by double clicking down here, load that up, turn on luminance and turn off the other two, so the only thing I have is a luminant material, drag and drop that to my plane. My render settings, you can see I've already got global illumination on, I have no lights in my scene. My HDRI is off, but I have illuminated my scene with this plane that creates even the shadows as well. And this is something that you can use to create different looks and feels or intensities. If you're used to photography, it's a very nice softbox effect. And that's one of the really cool, funky things that you can use with global illumination. So as we've seen, it allows for HDRI use. It allows you to use a luminant object as a light source, and it forces Cinema 4D to figure out how light bounces within a scene. Okay, any questions on that one?
So we have got a quick question. If
Okay.
the sphere is closer or touching the floor, would it reflect more? Or if the floor was pink and the ball was white, would it reflect more?
Yes, it would. If you had a white floor and a red sphere, you would get that natural reflective bleed through that you get if you were to put a red fire extinguisher next to a white wall. It bounces back, so that does do proper bleeding and light reflection.
Cool, I think that's it for now, really.
Okay. Right, so nothing more on lights then that we want to cover, but we shall look now at materials, yes?
Yeah, sounds good.
Sweet. Okay, so file and new. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about the materials because Elly is going to spend quite a bit of time in creating materials from scratch that you're going to use on your scene. So she's going to explain a little bit more about those as she goes. So I'm going to look at the material manager down the bottom here. Now there's a whole host of functions, but if you go to create, you can see we have quite a few different types of material that I can create, and that's ignoring the redshift materials that I have in a drop down here. So under the materials, we've got PBRs and standard and nodes and ubers, grass aerial, pyrocluster, for those of those that remember that, shadow catcher and sketch. The sketch material is a really cool sketch and toon thing, which sadly we don't get a chance to look at, but have a play with it. It's quite fun. The two that we're going to be looking at mainly are the standard material, and we'll have a look at a PBR material workflow shortly. So let's just create a new standard material. There is also a shortcut for doing that, which is, if you noticed earlier, just double click with your mouse in the material manager here, or there's a plus button there, which I forget about because that's only been here in like the last version. Then you will see that your material pops up in the right hand side attribute manager. I am definitely old school. I will double click the material and that brings up my individual material editor, which you can see is a little bit different and has, I think personally, easier access to this. Certainly if I'm going to give some form of demonstration, I'd like to be able to show them all at once. We have the color channel. This color channel, funny enough, allows you to change the color of the object that you have in question. This is the material. So just like before, I can click and I can drag, I can change that, I can change the brightness, which is very similar to intensity, which I can also over increase, but I'm just going to keep that at 100. And you can change the material. If you want a color wheel, you can click the color wheel. If you want the color square, you can click that one instead, the spectrum, which is quite nice. And you can change the color of your object. You can also, if you want to, use an image as a texture for your object. So if you had a scene set up and you had a television screen or pictures or paintings and things like that on your walls, then you could load up those materials in here, either with the load image, pressing this big empty bar, or the 3 dots. You can choose an image. Do I have anything on my desktop? No, I have a training image somewhere. Do I have a picture? I have a screenshot. How exciting. Displacement map, test PNG. There you go. I can click open. Yes. And it will appear as an image on my object. Cinema 4D will also allow you to use images, image sequences, sorry, and videos as textures. So if you had an animation and there was a television screen in it, then you could actually have a television animation apply itself as a texture to the screen, so it would play through your animation. If you no longer want your texture there, you can just drop down and do clear, and that will get rid of it, and then you are back to the standard material that you had before. Diffusion, I'm simply not going to cover with this because of time allowances. Luminance, which you've seen before, that allows you to put a tick in the box and control how luminant your object is. This is the amount of brightness data that you can make it emit as part of an global illumination workflow, or how an object looks like it is being illuminated from the inside. So there's a couple of different uses for that one. Transparency, we will definitely look at in a bit, but funnily enough, it makes things look transparent. Reflectance is something that allows you to control by default the specular of an object, and that is how shiny something is. This is all part of a standard workflow. We will look at a physically accurate workflow shortly, which is a different thing. So I can control the width and height, sorry, that's not that. Width and strength of my specular, and you can see that the width is how far across an object it spreads, and the strength is how strong it is. So this controls how shiny an object is. Again, this is a standard renderer workflow. We will move on from that shortly. Environment, I'm going to skip. Fog, I'm going to skip. Bump allows you to make stuff bumpy. Bump means that you create some form of map, funnily enough, a bump map, which is a grayscale image which allows you to make something look bumpy. So I'm going to use my drop down, and the easiest grayscale map that I can use to create very quickly is a noise map. You can see very fast that it looks bumpy. Now, I'm going to create a sphere, and I'm going to drag and drop my material to it, and then I'm going to render. And you will notice bump is a lie, like the cake. The bump is a lie because if you look at the outer line of my sphere, it is not actually changed the surface. It is still a perfect sphere. It's very useful for adding bumps and scratches and things on that give the effect of it being bumpy without actually needing to physically change the geometry. You can physically change the geometry with a displacement map, but we're not going to go into that at this point. Glow does exactly what it says on the tin and adds a glow around the outside. It's a little bit cheesy, but it is incredibly useful for making neon signs, as you will find out. The alpha channel allows you to add an image into your textures here and literally take away information. So rather than make it transparent like a window, which is glass that you can see through, this allows you to take information away, like a wire net or a gauze or something like that. No longer requires the actual physical model to be there anymore. And as a very quick demonstration, I'm going to use my drop down. I'm going to go to my surfaces, and then I'm going to create a checkerboard material. And you can see that that will create my checkerboard. I need to put a tick in my box for my alpha, and now I have a checkerboard material being created, and bits of my sphere are visible and others aren't. They're not transparent, they're simply not there. Normal map is a kind of bump map and reflection that works its way off 3 different degrees of reflection information and is mainly used in gaming, particularly for getting a lot of information to do with bumps and informations onto very low polygon models, which is why gaming uses it an awful lot. Okay, that is a kind of rough understanding of materials for the standard workflow. Again, Elly will go through a lot more information about what each channel does when they're going to talk about the actual making of individual materials. There is a difference between our 2 renderers that come with Cinema 4D, and I'm just going to look at my render settings here. We have a standard renderer and we have a physical renderer. Now, physical is designed to be more physically accurate. Very tiny history lesson. When Cinema 4D was created, we had one renderer, and that was the standard renderer. As of course 3D programs were new and everybody was writing them and trying to figure out how on earth they worked, then the standard renderer just sort of evolved and grew and moved on to different things. When computers became better and expectations of 3D increased, we needed to create a new form of renderer that was more physically accurate, and that was the physical renderer. Now, the physical renderer has different render settings, and again, we'll look at those in another session. But if you are going to be using the physical renderer for more physically accurate rendering, photorealism and things like that, you need to change your workflow. So I'm going to take my material and delete it, and I'm going to create a new one. Now, I could create a PBR material, but I'm not going to. I'm going to create a standard material again. And what you do with your standard material, we load it up, we turn off the color channel. This is going to sound very strange, but the color isn't real in a physically accurate world. Color is what is light bouncing off of an object in real life. Life reflects light back to things, and the light that reflects back is the color that we see. The rest of it is absorbed. So when using physically accurate rendering, you want to turn off color and avoid using it as much as you can. We will do a lot of things for physically accurate rendering in the reflectance channel. The first thing you should also do in the reflectance channel is delete the specular, because this too is a lie. The specular, again, was old school. What do people need to change when dealing with properties of objects? So we had two different things: reflection and specular. And then when dealing with physically accurate stuff, we realized that neither of those two are actually real things, and technically you have a reflectance layer. This is everything in the world is reflective, so everything must reflect because it reflects light. But the surfaces are either incredibly rough, and therefore you get a very matte reflection like tables and rubbers and skin, or you get a very shiny, you get a very smooth surface, so you get things like mirrors and metals and plastics and so on and so forth. They require different reflection algorithms to be created. So the first thing you do is you delete your specular because it is a lie. Specular isn't real. And we click the add button, and you can see we've got quite a lot of things that we could add. We're not going to go through all of them, don't worry, we'll be here forever. Your main reflection layers exist here, and they are Beckman, GGX, Phong, and Ward, which you've got, I don't need to explain, everyone knows what they mean. So let's just create a Beckman. And if you want to know what they all do, the best thing that you can do is right click on type and go show help. And this will take you to a document in our help file, which goes into incredible detail about the differences between the different types and the different settings that you can get. But if you're interested in the main differences between GGX, Beckman, Phong, and Ward, here is a game I like to call Spot the Difference. But you will see there are subtle differences between some of them. But if you really want to know what you should do, this is the bit that you should read. Or in summary, for plastics and pretty much everything in the world, use Beckman. For metals, use GGX. For physical and for skin and rubber and soft stuff, use Ward. It doesn't even talk about Phong much here. But you can see the difference is very thin. However, if you're going to use Beckman, it's for plastics and pretty much everything. GGX, metals, Ward, rubber, and skin. So just remember that. So we add our Beckman reflection layer, so for our plastics. Of course, this adds a reflection layer all the way around, which is a bit much for us sometimes because there's something else that isn't turned on by default, and that is something called a Fresnel. And a Fresnel exists down here, and we have a layer Fresnel, and at the moment it is off. Now, a Fresnel is based on the principle that, and this is an interesting one, everything is reflective at 90 degrees. So you will notice that if you have a reflective floor, if you start to creep down so that you are almost 90 degrees, as flat to the floor that you will get, you will see that it is much shinier, much more reflective than it was when you were looking at it at a different angle. This is one of the principles that causes mirages in deserts, because you are actually able to see light reflecting off of something 90 degrees because of the way light bounces off of sand dunes. So when you think you're seeing water in, on the floor of a desert, you're actually seeing the sky 90 degrees above it, because that's the way light reflects. There's the science lesson for you. So the thing that we need to remember in 3D is that we need to turn it on so that it doesn't do anything. And we have none on by default, and then we have two different types: dielectric and conductor. Non-metal, metal. That's pretty much the way you differentiate the two. Conductors conduct metal, or metals are conductors. So if it's metal you're trying to create, you put it as a conductor. If you're going to do plastics, like we're about to do, you turn on dielectric. And you can see that I have a dark sphere now. So I have a reflection material going all the way around, but I have nothing underneath it. I need to create another new material, and this is my diffuse. This is my, for want of a better word, color. This is the underlying surface that will bounce back the light. And I'm just going to use a Lambertian, and I need to make sure that this is underneath my reflection layer. So I'm going to click and drag that underneath, and you can see that I now have a white material-ish with a reflective layer over the top. And this is where I would do the majority of my color stuff. So if I want to change the color of my object, then I would do that here under my diffuse layer and my reflection layer over the top, where I could increase its roughness and strength. And they are the two things that I would generally change and play with there. And just for those of you who are really curious, if I was to go to create materials, new PBR material, and let's have a look at that one, you would see that by default the color channel is off, the reflectance channel is on, and I have my diffuse and my reflection there. But I wanted to show you how you can create your own, and how you can create a material that is used or can be used between the two. Right, that is an incredibly quick overview of the standard versus physical workflow. Are there any questions on materials, standard and physical?
So really quickly, can you work in a specific color space so it's broadcast accurate?
Good question. I think that is based on color profiles, which if you have a look at your project settings, you can do an input color profile and you can choose a specific color profile and load various informations there, save presets if you want. But I think it's a different color profile you would need to be using, I believe.
Cool. Can there be more than one color overlaid?
Yes. So that one, just having a look at my normal material, you can create a color. What you can do here, you can just choose a standard color, but what you can do using Cinema 4D's little drop downs, our texture manager has a really fun thing called a layer. And if I create a layer, I can add a color shader, and let's make that one white, and let's create another color shader and let's make that one blue. And then going back, I can choose to overlay these, or these could be images. I can choose multiplying, screen burn, all of the sorts of blend layers, blend types that you can get in something like Photoshop.
Cool, got a couple more. TJ was just saying thanks for going into all that PBR material stuff in Cinema 4D. Hasn't seen it described like that, so
okay,
really
cool.
Greg was asking, when would you use so PBR versus standard? What would be your kind of reasoning?
If your output, you want to be as physically accurate and photorealistic as possible, you should be using the physical renderer. Therefore, you need the PBR workflow. because if you use the color channel in a physical renderer, it slows it down astronomically because it's trying to calculate something that isn't technically physically accurate. So you need to make sure that you use the PBR and physical renderer in conjunction. If you wanted to do something that was not physically accurate, so maybe a bit more stylized, a bit tweaked, or you want to use something like our sketch and Toon material, then that is when you would use the standard material. So the standard renderer does still have its uses. It's not completely defunct. It's got the ability of tweaking things outside of something that's physically accurate.
Cool, thanks.
That's right.
And lastly, is bump sort of like simulated texture, and displacement adds actual hills and valleys as such on the object?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So displacement is called that because it will actually displace the polygons of the object that you have created, whereas a bump map is it is a simulated effect over a surface. So if you're going to look at that golf ball and it's going to be on the table, stick a bump on it because you're never going to get close enough with the camera to see it. If you're going to be much closer in, then you'd need displacement. And there is a rendering calculation and time cost. Displacement takes more time to render.
Cool, yeah, I think that's all the questions for now. But of
Great.
course, we can keep answering in the background if we need to.
Cool, okay. Right, is it my turn to throw the screen at you?
Yes, let's go for it.
All right, there you go. It's throwing your way.
Thank you very much. Right, let's get into it. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Cool, right, okay, so last week we made our shelf scene, we modeled our own shelf scene, and so I thought this week we would create our own textures for it. So if any of you want that file, it's in the chat, but if you can't find it, let Matt know, and he can kind of link that to you, and we can kind of, I'll go at a pace where I assume people might be following along. So yeah, we're going to create some different materials just in like a variety of different ways, really. So let me get that up. Right. Okay, cool. So this was the scene we made. I just sort of got my normal camera in here. And okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to move that out of the way so I can see what's going on. So I actually work in Redshift, and what I like about Redshift is they have the render view, and kind of there is a bit of like a sort of like a cheat way that we can do this in Cinema 4D, which is going to help us today, just to kind of see how our materials are looking, how our lights are looking in our scene. So we can come over to panel, and we can go new view panel, and it makes this new kind of view panel here, which is the same as our like viewport. It's the same perspective view. And so what we can do, we can grab these little 3 lines here, and we can hold it down, and we can dock it in here. And I'm just going to sort of make it a little bit bigger, just so we can kind of see what's going on. And then in here, I'm just going to go to camera, use camera, and I'm going to use my Cinema 4D camera. And so it's going to look through here. Okay, so this is like the first step. And then what we can do, we can turn on our interactive render region. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to hold down, I'm going to use a shortcut for that. So that is Option and R. And then we can see we get this, this interactive render region. And you might find this looking a little bit fuzzy, and that's because we have a bit of like a quality slider. So we can put it all the way down, and the quality won't be great, but it's going to render super quick in this region, or we can pull it all the way up. And because we're not doing anything too crazy, we can kind of pull this up to the top. And then what we can do is, as we add kind of some materials and some lights in here, it's going to update in real time, and it's kind of like a bit of a cheap way of having our own IPR. So that's like a handy little tip. Right, okay, so first thing we're going to do, we're going to set up a HDRI exactly how Matt showed us, and we're going to switch on our physical renderer and our GI, because we need some nice lighting. We need to set up these things before we create our materials, because then we're going to see how our materials are actually looking in our scene, as opposed to kind of making them, then doing our lights, and then it might change how they look. So what we're going to do, we're going to come up to the top here and we're going to grab ourselves a sky. And then we're going to come over to our asset browser. If you're not on S24, go to content browser and you'll be able to do this same thing. It's just going to look a little bit different, but the concept is the same. So we're going to be searching for HDR. And so you should all be able to see these, whether you're in the content browser or not. You should have access to a bunch of these. And we're going to go with, what one should we go for? Let's just grab this sunny road. So I'm going to double click that. And we've got our material now down here. Let's just close down that asset browser. And then I'm going to drop this onto my sky. So we've got that on there now. And we can't see any difference, and that's because we need to change our render settings as well. So if we open our render settings, which is this kind of icon here with our little like cogwheel, we're going to do two things. So the first is changing our renderer to physical. We're not going to change any other settings because, you know, that's kind of week 6. And I'm going to right click in here, or we can go to effect. And I'm going to grab global illumination. And we can see really quickly that that's actually already made a pretty big difference. So if I switch that off and I switch it back on, we can see we're getting some kind of slightly more natural lighting going on. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to really quickly grab a sphere. I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller. And I'm going to drop this same material on my sphere. And the reason I do this is so I can see, I can rotate this texture now, and I can see kind of where the light's coming in, and I can decide now which angle I want the light to be coming in based on this. So if we come into, on my sphere, come onto my tag, we can actually just grab that top one. And now if we watch the sphere, if I come down to here, and we can do the offset on our U, and we can see now we're sort of, the light's going to be coming in from this direction. And so let's say this is offset by 25%. So I can come to my sky little material tag, and we can add that. And we'll see now that we've got a bit of different lighting kind of going on. So we can kind of switch my sphere off now because we don't need that. And so originally it looked like this. So we're getting some kind of darker areas around here because the light is actually, I think, slightly behind this kind of back wall. And so if we just rotate it slightly, we've brightened up this entire image, and we're just getting some nicer lighting overall. And so this is what I'm going to leave the lighting at for now. I might later on add a couple of kind of area lights just to see if we can bring out some of the shadows. But for now, this is enough lighting, enough natural lighting to help me create my my materials from scratch. Right, okay, so let's create our first material. And our first material is going to be this sort of plastic material in here. So I'm just going to come right in here so we can really see. So we can really see kind of this this Maxon logo object. And so I'm going to go to create materials, and I'm going to get a new standard material. So the reason I don't double click or use this is because I have my default material set up as Redshift, so I can't do that. So I'm going to leave this as a default material, and I'm just going to kind of duplicate it every time I want to make a new one. So I'm going to leave this as it is, and I'm just going to call it default. So you guys don't have to do this if you're like standard Cinema 4D is set up for standard materials, that's fine. This is just for me. And I'm just going to command and click this. So I'm going to keep this default material here just so I have access to that instead of having to go to create material every time. Right, okay, so let's double click this material. And we're going to call this plastic. And we're going to make a plastic material. And as Matt just showed us, we are going to create these the kind of like the more physical way. So we're not really going to use the color channel, but I will be using it for some of the textures. So I'm just going to switch that off. And in my reflectance, we're going to remove our, like our fake specular. So we're going to get rid of that. So the first thing we want to add is we want to add our diffuse so we can define the color. So if I grab that, and inside our layer color, this is where we can choose, you can choose any color that you want. I'm going to go for a bit of like let's go for like a red, maybe sort of like a slightly darker red. Okay. Yeah, let's go for that. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to drag and drop that on my material. On my object, sorry. So now we can see we have our red color, but we have kind of no reflectance going on. And what we're going to do, we're going to add another layer, and we're going to kind of change our layer Fresnel and use a preset to make it look kind of nice and like plasticky. So let me just sort of come out of here so we can see this a bit better. Right, so let me add my Beckman. And it's gone kind of fully shiny, fully reflective. And so we don't want that. We want to come down to our layer Fresnel. And where it's set to none, we're going to set this to dielectric. Because we're creating a plastic material, we're going to want to choose the Fresnel as dielectric. And then it's the preset. We have a whole bunch of presets in here, which are super handy and super useful, and we'll be using like a whole bunch of them. And I find this PET works quite well as sort of like a glossy plastic. And so if we take a look, we have a bit of like a glossy plastic material now. And all we've really done is set this up inside of our reflectance. So we could have, added our color and put our red color in there, but as kind of like the guys were saying, it can render a little bit longer. So, you want to try and get that all in the reflectance channel. So that was our first texture. So super quick, super easy. We now have our plastic material. So I'm just going to drag and drop this on these other little bits here. Cool, right, so now let's come out of here and let's now create let's come into here, into our little lava lamp. I'm going to create a bit of like a brushed chrome texture. So again, I'm just going to copy my default material over, and I'm just going to call this, let's call this brushed, if I could spell, brushed chrome. Cool. So we're going to drop our material onto the different parts of our lava lamp. So we're going to have this top section and this bottom section, because inside here it's going to be all glass. And let's double click to open our material. Again, we can switch off our color channel because we don't need that. And inside our reflectance, we can just delete our default specular. Cool. So now we can add, I'm going to add a GGX, because GGX is the better option for when it comes to creating metals. So I'm going to grab my GGX, and already, I mean, on its own, it actually looks quite a nice sort of rough metal material. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to come down to my layer Fresnel. This time I'm going to choose conductor because it's a metal material. And my preset A handy one here is silver. And inside my layer color, I'm going to sort of make this a little bit of like a darker gray, and it's going to create this really nice sort of slightly darker chrome, or maybe a bit of like a platinum. So if I sort of bring this down, we now have this sort of nice darker metal material. And I might even increase my roughness just slightly, just so we create that nice like brushed effect. So if we sort of come into here, so we've got that nice kind of like slightly brushed chrome effect. But if you want a super shiny, you can just turn your roughness down to 0 and you get that really nice shine, and it's kind of reflecting all that stuff around it, as well as that HDRI image. But let me just put that back up to 19. Okay. So let's now create, actually, first of all, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to duplicate this brush chrome texture. I'm going to open that up, and I'm just going to put this back, so pretty much 100% white. So we have more of like a lighter chrome, and I'm going to apply this to our brackets on the back of our shelf. So let me just drag and drop that onto these. And because that was symmetry, I've only had to apply it to the main cube, and it's kind of just duplicated it over. And then the same under here for these brackets. Just going to add those on. And that's looking okay already, to be fair. Right, so now let's...
Have you got the same material on the lava lamp? I think you duplicated and then edited the wrong one.
Did I?
I think so.
Oh, no.
You can check the assignment.
That should be the one on there. And that should be on there.
Okay. I swear it updated when you did something, but...
Oh no,
sorry.
It probably did.
Halfway between a couple of questions as well, sorry. Quick question. Can we make a material for physical, but at the end render it in standard? So can you make a PBR material and then render it with a normal renderer? I don't. Well,
you could. I think it would look a bit strange.
Yeah, I don't think it translates properly, but I mean, we can test it right now by just changing our renderer from standard to physical, physical to standard. I don't think anything without a color channel will work.
I'm going to do a quick render with it on, just so I can see what it looks like.
Yeah.
So, okay, that was a physical. And let me go standard.
Not a great deal of difference there.
Not a great deal of difference. Maybe it's once I've finished it, I'll do another one. That might.
We can do a comparison. That's a good idea.
Yeah, that might be, because I don't think there's enough materials on there at the moment, but we can.
And Jesse's asked very quickly, can you use a texture for the roughness of the chrome of the material, or something procedural like noise?
Yes, you could. Tell you what, let me create the ceramic material, because that uses, oh, sorry about that. That uses noises inside of the materials, and you could do the same effect inside of the reflectance for the roughness. So let's come into here. Let's create a ceramic material using noises. So I'm just going to again duplicate this over, and I'm going to call this ceramic, and I'm going to make sure that's on my vase. Cool, right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load a noise inside of I'm just going to do it inside of my color channel just to show this. Right, so let me grab a noise. And so we can see this noise shader has kind of been mapped onto our vase object. What we can do, we've got a whole bunch of different noises in here. So, you know, we can take a look and see which one. So when it comes to sort of defining your roughness, perhaps you might want to have a look through and see which of these suit. But I'm actually going to stay on the standard noise, and I'm just going to adjust my global scale. So ceramic material has sort of like some of those little like speckles. Well, that's the one that I'm creating, is going to be sort of like with a whole bunch of little like speckles over the top of it. And so if I reduce my global scale, we can see that we're getting a slightly finer noise shader. And if we go even further, let's go to maybe like 10%, we're getting even finer. And so we're almost sort of faking these little speckles. I think I ended up on something like a global scale of 2. And so we're getting a little bit closer, but I'm now going to adjust the low clip and the high clip of my noise shader to kind of get rid of some of the sort of like darker areas and bring up some of the whiter areas. So we're getting sort of a few less of these speckles going on. So if I reduce my high clip, we can see this is sort of brightening up, or sort of is removing some of those darker areas, and it's sort of it's clamping it slightly. So if I move this quite a bit down, it should update here. So we now have this sort of effect going on, and it looks a little bit more like this ceramic material, especially when we're sort of at a bit of a distance. It's a nice way of sort of like faking the effect. And so we're going to come into our reflectance again. We want to make sure we delete our default specular, and we're going to add a Beckman. And we just need to change our Fresnel again to dielectric. And I'm going to leave it on custom, but at the moment it's a little bit too shiny for my liking. So I'm just going to sort of increase my roughness a little bit, just so we're getting that sort of slightly less kind of glossy effect, a bit more diffuse.
Yeah, a nice sheen, but not too shiny.
Yeah. And one other thing, really quickly, that I'm going to do, I'm going to come in real close to here, and I'm going to come back to my color channel, and I'm going to click this little kind of down arrow here, and I'm going to copy my shader, and it's going to copy my noise shader. Then we can go into our bump channel, and this is where, you know, we can fake some of that like false displacement, bit of sort of like added texture. And I'm just going to paste my shader in. And so now where these sort of these little speckled areas are from our original noise shader, we now have some bump. And at the moment the strength is way too high. So let's just sort of move this back down to 5. Maybe let's go for 8. Yeah, this is all kind of, you know, preference really. And so now we have quite a nice kind of ceramic looking material, and we've done that just by using our noise shaders. So, you know, so you could use a noise shader inside of your reflectance. So, you know, you have your layer mask or your layer color, and all you do is do your little drop down, and then you can add your noise in there. So that's how you do it using noise shaders. Right, cool, let's do a glass material, because this should be super quick and super easy, and we're going to do this on our lava lamp. So let me just come in there, get my render region back up. Right, so this is going to be our glass. So let me just drop my glass onto here. And you know what, I'm going to add my ceramic material. I'm also going to use for the base of our little dolphin guy. So I'm just going to drag and drop that on there, just so it's on there as well. Right, let's create some glass. And so inside our reflectance, this is going to be a recurring theme for a while. It's just to delete our specular, and then we're going to add our Beckman. And we can use, really simply, we can use a preset for this for our glass. So we want to go to dielectric because, you know, we're not creating a metal material, so it doesn't need to be conductor. And then in our preset, we actually have glass as a set preset. And it sets our IOR as well. And so, you know, the IOR, index of refraction, is 1.517 for glass. But if you're using maybe like clear acrylic or like acrylic glass, it's 1.49. And so, you know, you can just Google and you can do like the most accurate IOR for the material that you're creating. And there is another step we need to do, because at the moment it's not really looking like glass. And that's because we need to also switch on our transparency. So luckily enough for us, by default, our refraction preset is actually already set to glass, and our index of refraction is exactly what we need it to. So all we need to do is switch on our transparency, and now we have our glass material. Cool. Right, so let's now create the gold for our dolphin, because it's using all the same kind of methods that we've just been looking at with our reflectance channel. So let me just copy that over. I'm going to call this gold. Let's just call it gold, because I haven't decided whether it's going to be shiny or rough yet. So just going to double click that gold material, and we want to make sure we drop it onto our dolphin. Cool. So we're going to switch off our color, and inside our reflectance channel, we're going to delete our default specular, and we're going to add a GDX because it's a metal. Inside our layer for now, again, we can choose conductor. And what's really nice is we have so many presets. So depending on the material you're creating, you can probably find the preset inside of here, or at least you can choose a preset that's going to be a really nice starting position. So I'm going to grab gold, and it looks quite nice anyway. But what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to adjust my layer color just to sort of bring a bit more kind of a gold color into the reflection. So if I sort of drag this over and we're looking for a bit of like a gold, a bit more yellowy, right over here. And so it sort of just sort of like adds that color onto the reflection instead of it being like that pure white. So I think that's quite nice. And should we go for a super shiny, or should we go for a bit of a rough? What should we do? That's a bit too much. Let's maybe go something like that. Cool. Right. And I might even, you know, I might even add this brush material onto there. So we have our whole little ornament finished there. Right, so now let's work on our neon sign, because this is going to be using a couple of different channels inside of the material manager. But let's get right in here. So for my backplate, I'm actually just going to duplicate my plastic material. I'm just going to change this to plastic, and we're going to make it like a white plastic. So I'm going to drop that onto there. I'm just going to open it up, and we're going to sort of adjust some of the settings in here. So my layer 1, which is my diffuse, which is my color. In my layer color, I'm going to just choose just like an off-white. I'm not going to go 100% white. I might go about there. See what this looks like. So that's looking all right. And now we can work on our neon material. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drop that onto my text, onto my kind of sweep. Let's just come back out a little bit so we can see this. Right, so what we're going to do is we are going to switch off our color, and we're also going to switch off our reflectance because we don't need that. But we are going to work with luminance. So this is also, as Matt showed us, going to give off some lighting in our scene as well. And in the luminance channel, here is where we can define the color that we kind of, want our neon text to sort of be. So I'm going to go for a bit of a red, match that there. And we can, we can up our brightness if we wanted to. We can go a bit like crazy with it. And so that looks that's a little bit too much. So let's go back down to 100. And then we can use glow as like a little bit of like a post effect to create that glow on the outside without having to create it by upping the brightness in our luminance. So we can come down to the glow. I'm just going to switch this on. And if you watch, yeah, as soon as it fully kind of renders, we then get this glow that appears afterwards, a bit like, like a post effect. At the moment, the strengths are a little bit too much. And so if we come to our outer strengths, we can reduce this maybe down to something like 200. So because my objects are all like really small, we don't need these like crazy big numbers going on. And so that works, that looks okay. Maybe I'll come into the luminance, maybe we can mess with the brightness a little bit. So all of this is, just tweaking to find the look that you think works. You know what, let's leave it at that for now. And let's see what it looks like as we sort of come back out of it. Let's see what this is looking like at the moment. Okay, so yeah, we've got that nice like luminance and that nice kind of glow going on our neon sign. Right. Any questions before I get into creating the wood texture, because we're going to be using texture maps for that?
There is one, but I want to save it to the end when you've done everything, because it's not really material related, but it is a good question to go. Someone's just said, if there's time, can we go over the plastic material again?
Yeah. Yeah, so let me open up this plastic material that I've got. So I guess it depends which way you're creating your plastic material. So the way I made it was what we class as, the PBR way, the physical way. So I did everything inside my reflectance channel. So I've got my 2 layers. So my first layer, which is, so you go to add, and I added this Lambertian, which is our diffuse. And so that made my first layer. And then I just adjusted the color. So depending on the color plastic that you're after, in the layer color of this first layer, so our diffuse, is where you're going to choose that. So we're going to come into here and we're going to adjust our color. Our second layer, so we went to add, and we then added a Beckman. And that then made this second layer here. And in this second layer, we went down to the layer Fresnel. And by default, this is all set to none, but we've set it to dielectric. And then once we set it to dielectric, we then have access to all of these kind of presets. And I personally find PET works as a really nice preset for creating kind of realistic plastics. So that was how I made that.
Thank you very much.
No worries. Okay, so let's create our wood texture. First of all, going to make, I'll make the shelf one first. Let's get into here. So I think, is it? Yeah, ash. Cool. Okay, cool. So what I did actually, so let me come into my desktop. So on my desktop, I have, here we go, these kind of texture maps. And I grabbed these from the asset browser. So we come into the asset browser and we search ash. And then if we come all the way down, so first of all, we have this ash texture, but I thought, you know, it's cheating to just take one off the asset browser. I thought I'd show you guys how you can make it in case you have your own texture maps. If we come all the way down, we have this image media and we have all these JPEGs, and these JPEGs are what made up our ash texture. And we can apply these into the different channels inside of the material manager to create this kind of wood texture. And so what I did was I downloaded these and I saved them as JPEGs. And so they're now on my desktop for me to use. So let's get rid of our asset browser. And we're going to come in close to in here so we can kind of see what's going on. Right, so be a couple of steps on this one, but I'll go a bit slower in case anyone is following along. So we're going to call this ash wood. And all it is a default material for now. So I'm going to drag it onto our shelf. Better put on my right one. Cool. Because my shelves are instanced, I have to make sure you drop it onto the original one. So I didn't there, which is why I didn't add properly. Cool, right. Is it still on that as well? Yes, it is. Right, let's have a look. Where is my... Okay, no, we're good. We're good, cool. Right, let me open up my ash texture. Right, cool. So we are actually going to use the color channel for this because the color channel is where we're going to add our base color texture. So inside my color channel, we can go into our texture and we can load an image. And we need our ash color. So we've got our ash reflection or reflectance, ash color, and ash bump. And so we need to put our color in our color channel. And so straight away, we can see that that has shown up in here. And then what we need to do, we can come into our reflectance. And there's a couple of things we're going to do here. We're going to add two different layers. So we're going to remove our default specular. And we're going to add, the first one is going to be a Beckman. And we need to make sure we go into our Fresnel. Again, we need to make sure it's dielectric. And if we wanted, you know, like a glossy shelf, we could leave it like that. But, you know, we could up the roughness slightly if we don't want it to be too much of like a glossy looking material. And then I'm going to add another Beckman. And inside here, inside the layer color, here I'm going to add my ash reflection, which is my grayscale map. And then what we need to do, we need to make sure our attenuation is set to additive. So it's going to sort of like add it onto kind of our secondary layer. And then I'm just going to sort of reduce this kind of amount, just so because we don't want it to be too kind of overbearing on our material. And I'm also going to up my roughness again, so we don't have this super shiny kind of glossy looking wood. So now
we've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
And we're wondering why you're putting the image in the color channel rather than using a Lambertian in the reflectance with the image on.
I guess both ways would work, really. But I
in
think
theory, if we're doing the PBR material, we should avoid using the color channel because that slows it down.
Okay, let's have a look. Let's clear that out. And let's add our in here, and let's drop that down to the bottom. And then we're going to add into here, yep. Okay. Hmm.
And we're going to need to add our layers, I think, to, yeah, additive rather than.
Hmm. So yeah, has a slightly different look, but it will be interesting to see what it looks like when it's like rendering properly with. Hmm.
That actually seems slower though, doesn't it? Which is odd.
Yeah.
I would, so yeah, if I'm doing PBR stuff, I avoid using the color channel because that will slow rendering down. Although weirdly enough, that's faster. Are we still on physical renderer?
We are.
Yeah, that's odd.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Um,
Well, here we go. We have it like that instead.
Also, somebody has asked, what's the reason that you've put the ash reflection in the third layer, but we could have put it in layer 2? So the first Beckman you created, is there a reason why you didn't put the ash reflection on in that?
So I could control the different kind of percentages of the reflection, but you could add that in there, yeah, if you
Yeah,
wanted to.
it's an interesting kind of principle when dealing with this sort of stuff, is that we create a layer that is the wood, a layer that is the reflection of the wood, and then we create a layer that is like a glossed top coat of the wood over it. So you can kind of add multiple different layers to get the different effects. And as Elly said, it then gives you the ability of tweaking those little things individually without having one that controls all three.
Yeah, just for a bit of additional control. But yeah, of course, there's no reason why you could not have it just on the second layer. But yeah, you wouldn't have that added control, I guess. Okay, cool. Right, so let's see what this is looking like at the moment. So to me, like personally, I think the wood texture looked better with it in the color channel. But we can see what it looks like when it renders properly. Because yeah, it didn't seem to take too much longer. So it'd be interesting. I might actually, do you know what? I might even duplicate it and we can do a test in a little bit. So that'd be that one. Yeah, I'll be interested to see like the actual time difference of it. Because to me, this one looks a bit nicer, but hey ho. Right, so, oh, the only other thing I didn't do is we forgot our bump channel. So if I just switch on my bump, we're just gonna quickly add in our final texture map, which is our bump in here. And let me just sort of get right in there. So we see what it's looking like. 20% I think will be a bit too excessive. So it's gonna take a little bit longer now. You know what, I'm just gonna adjust, I'm gonna change strength to 5 because I've already kind of seen this. Let's see now. So it's all looking a bit grainy, but that will be resolved with some extra lighting and some kind of different samples at the moment. So I think we've got low samples on, but we don't want it to take too long kind of when we're sort of using the interactive render region. We don't want to be doing like a full render every single time, otherwise it'd be taking us way too long. Right, so the final material, we're basically just going to create in the exact same way as our ash, and it's going to be our beech texture on our Maxon text. So let me just, for one last time, grab this default material. Oh God, I didn't realize the time. Right, and we're going to call this beech wood. And we'll make it in the same way. So we'll switch off my color channel. I'm just going to drop this on to my final object. And then in my reflectance, we're going to, do the things that we did before. So add our diffuse, and here is where we're going to add, our color, or it will either be called color, base color, or albedo if you're kind of Googling texture maps. Right, yeah, inside my layer color, I'm going to load an image, and it's going to be this beech color. Right, and now I'm also going to add my Beckman. And in here, we want to set our layer Fresnel to dielectric, and then we'll leave that as custom actually. And then, you know what, I'll do it like someone suggested, I'll just do it all in the layer color for this one. So instead of adding my third layer, I'm just going to drop my reflectance map inside here. So I'm going to drop down my texture. And for this one, the bump and the reflection was just the same texture map from the asset browser. So it's the same one used, which is fine because it's just like a grayscale version. So that's fine. And then finally, we're going to grab our bump channel. We're going to switch that on. And we're going to load our beech bump reflection again, and then we just want to make sure our strength isn't too crazy, because our shelf scene objects are kind of quite small. So if we have like a strength of 20%, it's going to be quite excessive for us. Cool, right, okay, so let me switch that off for now. So far we've created, a whole bunch of different materials in slightly different ways. And so what I'm going to do, I'm actually just going to get rid of this view panel now because I don't really need that. And let me just look through my camera. So let's do a quick render, see what this is looking like. See what our textures look like. And it shouldn't take too long, even though we're using like physical. So we've still got, it's a bit of like noise and grain going on. That's because we'd need to up the samples in our render settings, and we can also, adjust our global illumination primary and secondary engines. But I don't really want to get into that too much today, because that's going to be like a whole big topic for week 6. And yeah. So yeah. Created a whole bunch of textures. We did that in like a physical way, but Matt showed us how we could have made those in like the standard way using the color channels, and kind of like the idea behind these is all kind of like can be kind of translated between either standard or physical as well. Yes. Any questions? Or Matt, did you say there was something you wanted to show after?
Yes, sorry, I was trying to find the window and the button. We had a good question, which was, when you create an HDRI, you obviously get to see it in the background. How can you remove the HDRI from the background but still have the lighting information?
Oh, that is a good question. See, I need to remember how to do this now because I'm so used to using Redshift. Is the
do you want to throw it back to me then? Yeah, compositing tag.
Yeah. Remind me what that is.
Animation should be render tags. Down. So yeah, and then compositing tag. And there's a little button there that says seen by camera. And this will remove the ability of the camera seeing this. So if you've got an HDRI background that is creating lots of nice reflections and lightings, but you don't actually want to see it, add the tag, which again allows you to add more interesting things and different settings to your objects, and then you can click remove by camera, seen by camera, and it will no longer be seen. So that's how you can use it to remove the HDRI without losing the information, the lighting information or reflection information that it creates. Someone's got an interesting one. What light do we apply to the bottom of the lava lamp to shoot up light through the lamp?
Oh, that is a cool question. Would you do
In
a visible light?
theory,
Would you do any
in
light?
theory, you could just have a normal light,
Yeah.
and you could use the project tab of the light to restrict the objects that it has an effect on. So you can actually choose to say this light only affects this object. And that way you could force the light to shine on the lava underneath to make it look like it's illuminating. There's a whole host of things to do with subsurface scattering that we did consider doing for this, but we thought, no, the amount of time that we've got to add proper subsurface scattering to get the effect of the lava properly illuminating with a light is just a little bit too much than we thought we could throw into this particular session.
Yeah, I do think, yeah, I've got a bit of like a illuminating material on the original project file, because I think
Right. Yeah.
I made a little like volume builder
Yeah,
kind of lava
that's cool.
inside of that, which we didn't have time for last week. But yeah, that should
There's
be on the original project file.
there's also a cheat as well that a lot of people use, which is a semi-luminant material with a Fresnel over the color to make it look like it's fading out if you don't want real subsurface scattering. But that's a cheat that you can look up on YouTube somewhere, I think. We did get an interesting question from Jake that says, if why still teach standard and physical rendering when we've got things like Redshift?
Yeah, I guess that is a good question. I guess the reason behind it is not everyone has access to third-party renderers.
Yep.
So not everyone has access to things like Redshift or I don't know, like Octane. Some people might not have the systems that could or the specs that can run these things. Sort of Redshift. I run Redshift on a Mac, but I do have a high spec graphics card, as well as being on, Big Sur. So there are sort of prerequisites behind having to have access to these renderers. And I guess like the other side of that is if we're teaching this to people who have never used like 3D or Cinema 4D before, having that base knowledge is always gonna be useful and be helpful when later on you're then using a third-party renderer, because things like Redshift and Octane are very advanced to learn and to pick up, especially at the very beginning. Like I only learned Redshift kind of at the middle of last year, and it's quite like a steep learning curve. And so having that base knowledge of how lights work and how to create materials, whether it's standard or physical, definitely helps when translating into a third-party renderer. But what do you think about it, Matt?
Well, I was about to say, the other thing is, of course, there are still places for it. Not everybody needs physically accurate rendering. Not everybody is doing photorealism. A lot of people do various arty styles. You've got impressionists and things like that can use the standard renderer perfectly fine. It's still fast for a renderer with what it does that way, as well as like our sketch and toon material. So there are still premises where different materials, different renderers will be quicker and easier for people to use. We do have a question on third-party renderers. In terms of specs using third-party renderers, does using a Mac differ from using a PC? The Redshift for Mac version wasn't released until it was absolutely certain that by the people coding it that they could match the speed quality of a PC and its graphics cards. Redshift for Mac, went through a lot of iterations to make sure that it was comparable to being on a PC. So for Redshift, it doesn't really make much of a difference.
Yeah.
Someone wants us to show a quick example of sketch and toon. Go on, Elly.
Do you want to take that on?
Yeah. Throw that back at me. I just need to make sure I've got.
also, as well, kind of like relating to the whole third-party rendering topic and Redshift, we did and do want to show Redshift. The idea initially today was to kind of do a mix of the two, but we worried that we would end up rushing through certain things just to show stuff in Redshift, and if not everyone has Redshift, we're kind of potentially only targeting maybe like 20% of the people here. However, we believe that in week 6, which is all about rendering, we'll have some free time. And so the idea will be to spend maybe a good hour of that week going through some stuff inside of Redshift and doing like a bit of an introduction, showing you some lights, showing you some of the like essential nodes inside of there, as well as render settings. So definitely, if Redshift is something you're either learning or keen to learn, or thinking about maybe getting into, I'd recommend kind of joining in on that week, and we'll definitely be going through native C4D stuff as well as some Redshift stuff that we didn't have time to do kind of over these first 5 weeks.
Cool. So quickly, Sketch and Toon, as you see that I've created here super fast, allows you to get a cartoony quantized look, and all I did for this was create a new material, and it's a Sketch and Toon material, and just double click and add it to the object, and you can see there I go, I've got my object there with its lines and materials. There are a whole host of different presets, so if you double click and open up your material, you can load a preset. So we can do red chunky felt tip pens, which will do that. We can do markers, you can do sketchy pens, you can change so much stuff when it comes to the different settings of these, the thickness of the strokes, what is distorting the strokes, the adjustments. You can get lost in the amount of different settings that you can play with that. A really nice example of like a variation on this is if I go to the asset browser and I search for dividers, and let's just download this image. This is an image that, let's pop out that now. Doc. This is an image done by Sketch and Toon. The Cinema 4D file is in the asset browser, but it's a really lovely example of the things that you can do with the Sketch and Toon, including you can choose a background for the objects, and you can choose a background for an image for the background, sorry, so that it looks like it's been done on paper and overlaid. So Sketch and Toon has an awful lot of different things to look for, and if you want to have a look for Sketch, open up Sketch and Toon, and you can see the different files that we already have where you can dive in, explore, and see what they do, how they look, and how they render. Oh, by EJ as well. I didn't realize that was by EJ. So if anybody knows iDesign, this is the guy that did this file for us. Okay, shall I throw the screen back at you, Elly?
Yeah, sure. And we'll do a bit of wrapping up.
There you go.
Cool. Right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
I'll take it as a yes.
Sorry. Yes. I was expecting someone else to answer then. I don't know why.
Cool, right. So as some of you know, we actually are recording these sessions and we're putting them on an unlisted playlist, which we've linked in here. And also every time you kind of register for this hands-on series, you should also get that link in the email. But, if not, you can always just drop us a message and we'll make sure that we get that over to you guys. So yeah, because all of them are being recorded, and yeah, you definitely have access to all of them. Really quickly as well, we have a whole bunch of stuff going on kind of this week, this month, loads of different kinds of content for you all. So we have this hands-on workshop, which is our beginners Cinema 4D workshop, but we also have a second hands-on workshop going on that's running kind of simultaneously. And that's all about particles inside of Cinema 4D, After Effects, and Red Giant. And so if you're keen to know about like particles, especially inside of, you know, like trap code and things like that, we'd recommend that with Nick and Chad. It would be super useful information. And if you're interested in Cinema 4D particles, they are actually doing on weeks 5 and 6, they're doing all things related to Cinema 4D particles, as well as thinking particles and a little bit of X particles. And I'm actually featuring in that week 6. So, you know, if you're keen to learn some more stuff like that, then definitely jump onto those. As always, you know, we have our Ask the Trainers, which are every 2nd and 4th Thursday. Sometimes they're themed, sometimes we have guests, or sometimes we just sit and answer your guys' questions live. So if you ever have like questions that maybe we didn't get around to in this, or something you think maybe isn't necessarily related to this, then definitely jump on one of those, and it'll be, you know, we'll get around to those and yeah, answer them live. Cool. So just before we end this, because I know we are on the hour now, I just wanted to quickly go through what we're doing next week. So next week we're getting into a whole bunch of stuff and relating to animation and dynamics, and it is going to be so much fun. Like, it's going to be some really cool stuff to look at. We're going to look at like specifically animating inside Cinema 4D, then things like keyframing, as well as some like cool like animating camera techniques, F curves and the timeline and what exactly those are, how we can kind of use them inside of Cinema 4D, as well as our extremely powerful dynamics system. And in particular, we're going to look at rigid and collider bodies, and that will be looking more at Cinema 4D tags as well. So we'll kind of get to see a whole bunch of those and see how they work as well. And then in the next couple of days, we'll make sure the project file's on there, but it will 100% be on there ready for next week's session for stuff that you can follow along with. And that's what it's going to be named. And yeah, again, thank you so much everyone for being here. And thank you so much, Matt, for all that like really amazing like technical stuff that you show us always. Like I swear,
You're welcome. Thank you for making all of the cool stuff. Showing what you can do with the things.
Yeah, well, it works, but it works both ways, doesn't it? So we have like the really like how to do stuff and like why we do it, and then we see it in like a practical sense. So it's all good. And yeah, thank you to everyone, first of all, for obviously your lovely feedback, your lovely comments, but also your questions, and to the people dropping in like useful tips. They're super handy as well, like super handy for kind of everyone who's part of the chat to see those. So that's really nice of you all to share your knowledge. That's really great. And yeah, I guess we'll see you all next week for dynamics and animation.
Yeah, just want to send the project files to someone very quickly, and then we will call it a day. Yeah, thank you guys for all of your lovely comments. Take care, have a good week, and we will see you all next week.
Yeah, have a good one, everyone. Bye.
Bye.